Big Lez's League, an all rugby league experience.
Hey guys, what's going on? Isaac here, recording another episode of Breaking Bread, the show where we touch on all the latest topics and trending stories in footy. As you know, my name is Isaac, and I'm doing another solo episode today, as Les is not able to come in for this week's episode. But fear not, we've got a ton of NRL news and trending topics that I kind of want to get stuck into. Some really big headlines, as well as a few that may have slipped under the radar for some of you. I'm going to be sharing my thoughts on all the stories that I've kind of published for Zero Tackle over the last week or so. And for those of you who've been kind of following the show over the last month and a half, 2 months, I do always like to finish on an opinion piece as well. So we've got a lot of cool topics that I want to kind of get into this week, and a few touchy subjects for some fans as well. But the first thing that I want to kind of start off with out the gates, I do like to start on kind of the biggest story that we got going in the NRL currently. And for a lot of you, you would know that the NRL officially announced the Perth Bears to join the competition in 2027 over the last few days. The addition is set to be, the 18th side in the NRL, which is a huge moment in not only, Australian rugby history, but, in Australian sport history. And so it's a huge kind of accomplishment for both the Bears, for the NRL, and for Western Australia NRL Bus, who are just keen to get back into the competition. And so what's kind of felt like an eternity for Bears fans has finally become a reality, and that is the return of the Bears in the NRL. So the NRL officially announced last week that the Bears would join the competition in 2027. Australian Rugby League Commission Chairman Peter V'landys discussed the monumental significance that this bombshell agreement holds for rugby league. And he kind of came out and he was, really big on the fact that the NRL is in a place at the moment to introduce, these new sides into the competition. Obviously, as a lot of you would know, the Dolphins entered the competition just 2 years ago, and they've been a monumental success. And I think, with the upward trajectory that the game's kind of going in, both in an international, global awareness, kind of perspective, as well as just a financial perspective, it's a no-brainer to introduce what feels like a long overdue side in the Bears coming back to the competition. And so with this kind of announcement, there have been a few talking points that I kind of want to get us stuck into. The biggest thing, and a lot of people aren't currently aware of it. Everyone's been focusing on the player attraction side and the coaching side, which are both huge talking points and something that I think we're going to be talking about for a long time as we await the introduction of the Perth Bears into the comp in 2027. But another huge kind of talking point that's in works at the moment is the potential for a player swap between the Perth Bears and the Western Force, which is a rugby union side over in Western Australia. So there's been talks of a player swap agreement taking place between the two clubs, which would see a few rugby union stars make their way into this Bears side. And essentially introduce some new faces into the comp that we may not have seen otherwise. And this is a huge talking point because obviously, union and league have been, at each other's throats for years and years and years. And there's always been that kind of competitive dynamic between the two sports, both beloved by Australian sports fans all over the country. But the fact that both sides are willing to kind of come together to make this kind of agreement speaks dividends to the monumental impact that this this inauguration is going to have for the competition. And it's really exciting for Perth Bears fans, especially when there's been a lot of talk about there potentially not being enough talent in the NRL to warrant an 18th side and the potential 19th side with the PNG franchise coming in 2028. But so basically what's happening is, again, Peter V'landys is currently in talks with the Western Forces owner, Twiggy Forrest, in regards to a player swap agreement. And essentially what he said was, you want to grow the game in Western Australia, you want to grow both games. And if you can, put together a player swap that would see a few NRL stars head over to Union, or a few Union stars head over to the NRL, why wouldn't you do it? And it's a really interesting kind of development that's come through, because I know a lot of sports in general wouldn't be keen on doing this. There's obviously the side, the numbers side and the analytics side, where you kind of want to keep your star players in your sport, so you can attract those ratings and merchandise sales and ticket sales, and it's all led by the star power of these athletes. So the fact that both sides are kind of willing to introduce these new players, speaks dividends to what a huge moment this is for Australian sport, and especially for Western Australian fans who don't get to see the light of day when it comes to these NRL fixtures and sport fixtures in general. I'm sure a lot of Perth fans would feel that they're somewhat forgotten over in WA, and so I think that this is a well overdue moment for those guys over there, and I think it'll be a huge talking point over the next kind of 12 to 18 months if we are to see some Union players head over into the NRL, through this new expansion side. I think that it's just another tick in the book when it comes to expanding the game, and it's just so exciting as an NRL fan to see kind of the levels that the sport is kind of reaching, especially compared to 5 years ago and 10 years ago, where it felt like the sport was at somewhat of a standstill. To see it now growing to this point, it's super exciting for the sport. So we will see the Perth Bears kind of come into the competition in 2027. There's been a lot of talk about who the coach is going to be, with Brad Arthur kind of being the loudest name that's kind of been shouted, but Sam Burgess has also thrown his hat in the race. Most recently, Mal Meninga has thrown his hat in the race. So there are a few coaches vying for that spot, and so if you can get one of these high-profile head coaches into the club, a few stars from Union and a few up-and-coming stars that are kind of sprinkled throughout the competition, I think you got a really good expansion side on your hands, and I'm really excited just for Bears fans to kind of get this opportunity. And if I'm being honest, I think that the club may have end up being in a better position than the Dolphins, and they had Wayne Bennett coming to their side, so that just speaks dividends to the support and backing that this Perth Bears side does have in the NRL. Next up, again, it wouldn't be an episode of Breaking Bread if we weren't going through Origin chat, and I've got a pretty big one that's one of the biggest names in footy has kind of dropped in the media last week, and that is Gus Gould. NRL Supremo Gus Gould, NRL legend Gus Gould, has come in, and he has issued a warning to the New South Wales Blues about a star player that they maybe shouldn't pick, according to the NRL boss, the NRL Bulldogs boss in Gould. Gus Gould has come through and warned the New South Wales Blues of picking Spencer Leniu, and has said that although he believes that Leniu is a great player and he's a fiery player, his services just don't match what the Blues need in the Origin arena in 2025. His actual quote, he said, "I like Spencer, but I don't always buy the idea that you need a 10-minute impact player off the bench in Origin." He went on to say that if you get two HIAs and a sin bin or a send-off, the complexion of your team completely changes dramatically. He says, "I don't think I would leave myself open to that. You can take the gamble," and it was a successful gamble last year because he can come on and ruffle some feathers. So a few interesting points, kind of, mainly pointing to the motor of Spencer Leniu, saying that, he simply can't stay on the field long enough to have a significant impact, and he doesn't cover, any positions other than in the middle. And while he's right, I've got a few stats here. He's right in the fact that, Leniu wasn't, a big minute player in Origin, and he's never been one at club. So Leniu averaged, just 25 minutes per game in his 3 appearances for the Blues last year, which is, it's extremely minuscule and it's nothing. But if you look at his output in those matches, he quadrupled his minutes played with his average run meters. He had 100 run meters per game, which is insane for a 25-minute stint in Origin, where, physicality is the name of the game. And I do think that, Gould has somewhat missed the mark here because, yes, you do need to kind of cover for injury, but that's what you've got your 14th man for and your 18th man. Leniu has a specific role that he comes on to play, and that is to just come on and absolutely whack blokes. And I think that the prospect of having Leniu on the field is opposing you if you're the Queensland Maroons is absolutely frightening. And if Leniu isn't in this side, I think that the Queensland players, breathe a sigh of relief, knowing that they're not going to be absolutely bruised and battered by this wrecking ball from the Sydney Roosters. And so if I'm Laurie Daly, I'm looking at that and I am absolutely 100% putting him in my side to come on for a 20-25 minute stint. You've got guys like Connor Watson, like an Isaiah Yeo, like a Mitch Barnett, who can cover multiple positions, whether across the forward pack or even in the halves. And so I do think that you're somewhat covered there already. You do want to, prepare for the worst, but, if you look at his output last year in his first 3 games as an Origin front rower, he was absolutely phenomenal. And Gus Gould went on to share what his forward pack and bench would look like with Leniu omitted from the side. He does have a debutant in his lineup as well, which is really interesting and something to touch on as well. But Gus Gould's New South Wales Blues forward pack and bench looks like this. So he's got Payne Haas at 8. He's got Api Coruscant at 9, which is really interesting. No Reece Robson. He's got Mitch Barnett starting at 10. He's got Hudson Young and Liam Martin at 11 and 12 with Isaiah Yeo 13. And then moving on to the bench, you've got Connor Watson at 14, you've got Terrell May at 15, Angus Crichton at 16, and Hamole Olakawatu at 17. So you'll see he's got 2 back rowers on the bench, one out-and-out middle, and a utility player in Connor Watson. The most glaring kind of part of this that I'm seeing is Reece Robson is not in the side. He's opted for an Api Coruscant. I wonder if that means, he's got Jerome Luai in his side, or if he just simply loves the Panthers connection with Cleary. I'm not too sure, but he's also got Mitch Barnett starting, and he doesn't have Leniu anywhere in this side. So really interesting. I can kind of see the path that he's kind of wanting to go down. That more 80-minute player, if need be, perspective for Laurie Daly's side. And while I definitely do kind of agree that you do need players that can cover multiple positions, I think with them Connor Watson, like Mitchell Barnett, guys like this, you can kind of cover for those positions. And if I'm Laurie Daly, I'm not scared or shying away from the idea of having Leniu come on for a 20-minute stint. So I don't agree with Gus here, but again, Gus knows a lot more than I do when it comes to footy. That's kind of where the direction that he's wanting to go in, and it'll be really interesting. We've got obviously Laurie Daly coming out this Sunday to announce the teams, and so when a guy like Gus talks, you listen. And so if this has raised a few concerns for the returning Blues coach, I guess we will see this Sunday. Next story, staying on the topic of representative honours, we've got another Origin star who has made his stance known when it comes to his rep duties moving forward. So AJ Brimson, Queensland Maroons star, has confirmed he will be switching his international allegiance, which effectively ends his Origin career for the Queensland Maroons. AJ Brimson has had his application approved to convert his international allegiance, which will see him switch Tier 1 eligibility from Australia to England. So this is huge because not only just from an Origin standpoint, which is something that we'll touch on in a little bit, but when you look at the international stage and all the dramas that have been kind of going around with switching allegiance and players swapping sides in the opening couple months of the NRL season, you've got a guy like AJ Brimson who hasn't played for the senior side for the Australian Kangaroos as of yet, and he won't now, but he is a Queensland Maroons star and has plugged the gap on multiple occasions for Billy Slater's Maroons side. And he's 26-year-old is now officially out of the Queensland Maroons side moving forward. So for those of you who don't know, if you are a part of a Tier 1 eligible international side, whether that's Australia, whether that's England, whether that's New Zealand, depending on which side you play for, results in whether you play Origin or not. So if you are an Australian player, you will have the opportunity to play for your state in Origin. But if you're in England, if you're an English or a New Zealander, you are not eligible to play in Origin. So for Brimson to make this call, especially when there's a few question marks about Reece Walsh's future in the Maroons side, as well as Kalen Ponga's availability and his willingness to put on that Maroons jumper once again, that fullback spot for the Maroons was right for the taking for Brimson, and so for him to make this decision is not anything but positive for the international game. It shows that guys are wanting to play for their country and wanting to grow that international presence. And while obviously England is not one of the lesser known rugby league countries, when you've obviously got places like Samoa, like Tonga, like Lebanon, and like Greece, like all these countries that are not on that level that an Australia or a New Zealand or an England is. It's still, a monumental kind of shift in the dynamic where players are willing to stray away from the Origin arena to represent their country. And it's a beautiful thing to kind of see, a guy like AJ Brimson make this call when he could have very well just, crossed his fingers and hoped that he would make it back into this Maroon side or that he would beat out the likes of Kalen Ponga or Reece Walsh. And so his introduction into the English side comes through his mother's English heritage. And so the application got approved just in time for him to play for England against the Kangaroos in the end of season Ashes series, as well as the 2026 World Cup. So the fact that this application has been approved now means that he can now start to prepare for those series that are coming up, those international series, and kind of helps him set the tone as the England's main star, because I do think that with his inauguration into the club, I do think that he becomes their go-to guy. He's just got so much X factor and so much talent on the footy field that I think it's a no-brainer that he's kind of the cog that pushes this England attack when it comes to the international matches. So really interesting talking point, and definitely something that I think will be discussed further on in the year when it comes to switching allegiance and international eligibility. You got guys like Tino Fasul Malawi, you got Payne Haas, who are all kind of switching their or considering international allegiance swaps. And so for a guy like AJ Brimson to make this call, it's huge for the sport internationally. What it means for the Origin side of things, I guess is yet to be seen. You don't want to see too many players swapping allegiance, because you then start to miss out on these star players in the Origin arena, and whether that pushes the NRL to make a switch when it comes to the rules around allegiance and eligibility, I guess remains to be seen. But yeah, if we keep losing star players to the international game, it's huge for the international game, but it is kind of a dampener on the Origin arena. Beautiful. Let's move on to our final story for today. So I kind of wanted to touch on a little opinion piece that I kind of put together for Zero Tackle. And so like I said, if you head over to zerotackle.com, you can get the full scoop on that. But the main topic that I wanted to kind of touch on today is the New South Wales Blues fullback dilemma. So kind of sticking with that trend of Origin, we're nearing the selection process now with Origin, in 2-3 weeks, coming up. So I kind of wanted to touch on the dilemma that they've got for that number 1 jersey in a kind of 3-man race that I've got heading into this Sunday's decision on team list. But the New South Wales fullback dilemma, I wanted to touch on 3 guys, that being Dylan Edwards, James Tedesco, and Ryan Papenhuyzen. So obviously, long-time Blues skipper James Tedesco was axed last year in favour of in-form fullback and Penrith Panthers premiership winner, Clive Churchill medalist Dylan Edwards. And Dylan Edwards came out and absolutely smashed it for the Blues last year and was a main contributor to the Blues' win. And so I think that, a lot of us, when we kind of saw Dylan Edwards make that leap and really shine in the Origin arena, the discussions around who will be the New South Wales Blues fullback kind of got put to bed. And I think most footy fans would have agreed that Teddy had simply, his time has kind of come to an end as a Blues player. And with so many question marks around if Ryan Papenhuyzen can even come back healthy to the Origin arena, it kind of paved the way for Dylan Edwards to be the long-term fullback for the Blues over the next 5 to 10 years. He's only 29 years old, so he's got plenty of time to kind of make himself the Blues, next long-term fullback. But Dylan Edwards has kind of started the year pretty disappointingly. He's, struggled with injury. His side has been absolutely awful in the Penrith Panthers, which has just been a shock to everyone in the competition. While, James Tedesco has essentially been the best fullback in the comp this year, if not number 2 to Ryan Papenhuyzen over at the Storm, who has overcome a lot of adversity, a lot of injury to make, his presence known, not only for this Melbourne Storm side, but potentially for the Blues side as well. So I wanted to kind of go through and discuss each players and a case for each player. And kind of give my thoughts on who I believe the Blues fullback should be. So, kind of taking a look at Dylan Edwards, obviously he would be the front runner for that Blues jersey, having been the incumbent, fullback for New South Wales. The full-time premiership winning fullback was, essential in the New South Wales Blues win last year. And I think, while his talent and, his on-field talent and his presence was, remarkable for the Blues, I think it was his work rate and his consistency that really made him a must-have in this Blues side. Similar to kind of Tedesco over the last decade or so has done in the Blues side. Dylan Edwards was, a consistent out-and-out, running fullback who was, he was averaging over 220 meters across both his matches for the Blues, and was tackling at a high clip, was creating for his back line and his players around him, and I think that his connection with Nathan Cleary in this Blue side this year would, it's something that you almost can't risk missing out on. The issue here is obviously, his abysmal start to the NRL season, and it's not his fault. He has struggled with, health issues as well as his club just simply not performing. And as we all know, if your club isn't performing, it's very hard for you to kind of shine, amongst the darkness. And so, I do think that, his club footy has definitely hindered what could be a long-term Origin career. But look, I do think if you believe that he can kind of come out and continue that form that he's shown from maybe 2021 to 2024, I think that he is a safe option for Laurie Daly, who's kind of coming into this side and is, hoping not to cause too much of a ruckus and wants to essentially win his first series back. He obviously lost his Blues coach's whistle a few years ago now, and the fact that he's back, he may not want to risk, ruffling too many feathers and kind of sticking with what the side has kind of worked, what's worked for the side over the last couple of years. So I definitely can see, Dylan Edwards retaining his spot, but a huge kind of talking point and a competitor in this situation is who he knocked out of the Blues jersey last year, and that's James Tedesco. So James Tedesco, he has played 23 games for the New South Wales Blues over his career, and is one of the most capped Blues of all time. And the 32-year-old he's gotten better with age. He finished second in Dalian voting last year. He's been absolutely electric for the Sydney Roosters this year. That, as a side, has been hot and cold. And I think he's really made a real strong case for himself to reclaim that Blues jersey. I do think that it is worth noting that, he's 32 years old and he relies a lot on his physicality and his fitness to kind of excel as a first grade footballer. And so I think that when you've got something like that kind of looming over you, Father Time, it can kind of cause fears for the future of the Blues. So if you remove a guy like Dylan Edwards and bring James Tedesco back in that side, how long do you really have him there? If it's for the next 2 years, is it worth it? if you're wanting to build a long-term side that, mirrors the likes of a Queensland Maroons that, won 8 in a row, if you want to build that core, is James Tedesco being in the side going to kind of halt that progress as, a dynasty, potentially in the Origin arena? I'm not too sure. But it's definitely, on the flip side of things, if you want to win now, who better to have than the most consistent footballer and fullback in the comp, James Tedesco, over the last decade. He has been, his leadership has been second to none over, maybe the last 10 to 8 years. And so I definitely think that, if you're the Blues, if you're wanting to bring a little bit more leadership into this side, especially in a side that's really young, you've got the likes like Stephen Crichton, you've got, Nathan Cleary, you've got like a lot of these young guys, Hamole Alakawatu, Hudson Young, vying for spots in that side. And if you're wanting kind of that veteran presence in the side, who better to have than, one of the greatest Blues of all time in James Tedesco. So if Laurie Daly's game plan is to kind of win right now, I think Tedesco is probably your best bet. Dylan Edwards hasn't been great to start the season, and Pappenhausen is a bit of a wild card, which we'll kind of get into now. But Tedesco kind of feels like a safe middle ground if you're wanting to win today, if you're wanting to win, this year. But it does run the risk of potentially, impacting the progress of the Blues over the next, 3 to 5 years. So definitely something worth touching on. But as I said, our wild card is Ryan Pappenhausen, who has made an amazing return to NRL footy in 2025 and 2024. Obviously, he has been injury-riddled for what has felt like years, and it feels like forever since he won the Clive Churchill for the Melbourne Storm back in 2020. But he has, returned to form. If not returned to form, set himself a new peak. And it's crazy. I say that it feels like he's, been around forever. He's only 26 years old, and he's the youngest of the three options that we're kind of talking about today. And that's where I kind of look at things, and I'm, hopeful for Ryan Pappenhausen if he is to claim that Blues jumper. He has probably been the most impressive player in the competition this year, which I know is probably a huge call, but Pappenhausen has, been absolutely decimated by injury over the last 5 years, and for him to come back and excel at the level that he is, speaks dividends to his determination, his grit, his work ethic, which are qualities that I think Laurie Daly will want to see in his players moving forward for the Blues. And so if you're wanting to kind of look in the direction of the future, and you don't think that Dylan Edwards is your guy moving forward, whether that be due to age, whether it be due to availability, or essentially talent, I think that guys like Dylan Edwards and James Tedesco really rely on their physicality, and their athleticism to dominate on the Origin stage, and just first grade stage. But you've got a guy like Ryan Pappenhausen, who I wouldn't say he's the biggest physical presence, but his natural ability and his natural talent as a rugby league player is probably some of the best. It rivals the likes of Kalen Ponga, like a Reece Walsh, to a lesser extent, a Latrell Mitchell. He's just got that X factor, and he's got that consistent level of footy where if he's healthy, you know what you're going to get from him, and that is just silky attack, and a reliable kind of ball handler and playmaker in your back line. And so if you can keep him healthy, I think he could be the most talented fullback that the Blues have had in years. And that's not to say that he'd be the best, but his natural talent is some of the best that I think we've seen for a fullback in the last 20 or so years. And so I definitely think that it is worth kind of taking a look at that direction if you are wanting to move on and look to the future. Now, whether that impacts the dynamic of this Blues attack, I'm not sure. But it's definitely something to kind of think about if I'm Laurie Daly. And so for me personally, if I'm kind of looking at these three guys, I'm really excited by the idea of having Pappenhausen in this side. However, kind of looking at the Blues win last year, Dylan Edwards is absolutely phenomenal for the New South Wales Blues, and he's only 29 years old. I think that you can get another 5 to 7 years out of him in the Origin arena should he stay healthy. He's also got that connection with the Blues lock in Isaiah Yeo, with the Blues halfback with Nathan Cleary, and potentially the Blues hooker and 5'8", potentially being Coruscant and Luai. So he's got that chemistry and that connection already with the players. He's already cemented himself as the Blues fullback from last year's series. And I definitely think that it's worth kind of considering sticking with what you've got and hoping for the best. Queenslanders kind of always give it to the New South Wales Blues, and the fact that the Blues aren't able to just pick and stick, and there's no loyalty there. And I think you got a real opportunity to build a culture and a sense of loyalty in that Blues jumper. And so if I'm Laurie Daly, I am looking at last year's series. I'm looking at the dominance that Dylan Edwards projected onto the Origin arena, and I'm sticking with him, if I'm being honest. And that sucks for a guy like Pappenhausen, because I do think that he's the most talented of the three, and is probably playing the best of the three right now. We saw his performance over the weekend. He had 36 points and 4 tries, and I do think it's really unlucky. I would have Pappenhausen in this side somewhere. And as for Tedesco, I'd probably bring him in as more like in a more mentorship, leadership role, if you can kind of bring him in from the Roosters to have that with the players. But in terms of having him on the field and having that Blues jumper in the fullback position, I wouldn't have him there. I think that his time has kind of come to an end, and while I do think that he would be absolutely phenomenal for the Blues, and probably the best option for them this year, he's not going to excel at this level for another 5 to 7 years, and you want a long-term fullback. And so, for me personally, I'd be going for Dylan Edwards, but keeping a really close eye on Ryan Pappenhausen as well, and what his health kind of looks like over the next 12 to 18 months. Like I said, he's only 26 years old, so he's definitely got some time left in him to make it into this Blue side, but I do think it's Dylan Edwards' turn at the moment. Wow, okay, cool. I think we are done for today. Crazy when Les isn't here. I feel like I'm just talking. But, there's just been so much kind of interesting stuff going around the NRL at the moment, and it's been really exciting for NRL fans and for myself as a writer and a journalist on the sport. And so, for those of you who don't know, I am a writer for Zero Tackle, and all the stories that we talk about on here are stories that I have already published. And so if you're keen to kind of, get an inside look or a deeper look before we talk about it on you can head over to zerotackle.com.au and check out the latest stories around NRL. Or you can head over to my Instagram. It's Issa_journalist, where we discuss everything footy related and all the stories that I kind of publish as well. So I think that'll be it from me today. Les should be back in next week, and we are looking into the potential of bringing in some guests and chatting to people around it. But let me know what you guys think about kind of the things that we talked about today. It's always kind of good to get a grasp of the things that you guys like talking about, what you guys like hearing, and any different opinions that you might have on the topic. But thanks for having me, guys, and I will see you next week.